Welcome back to Light in the Battle, Season 2, Emotional Detachment as a Tactical Advantage for Family Court. Light in the Battle is a podcast for autistic women healing from narcissistic abuse, and it is a podcast where we get clearer, calmer, and spiritually and legally harder to mess with. What I learned in my journey is that the legal advice and strategy for family court against people who make us feel confused or scared just doesn't land as long as emotions are running high. Survivors keep losing in court over and over. Then I figured it out. The safe parent has to show that they are the stable, child-focused parent, both in all the evidence that they generate, emails, texts, medical reports, and in their demeanor in court. As long as survivors show up in court frazzled with raging PTSD and resentment, and as long as they keep writing angry emails or share how mad they feel that contact has been allowed, or refuse to cooperate on certain aspects, they're never going to win. Although their concerns and feelings are mostly valid, and they don't change after we achieve emotional detachment, survivors need to stop creating content for the other side to use to make them appear unstable and unsafe for the child. So I'm taking you on the journey that I traveled throughout this season to get to a point where I detached completely. I cared just as much about my child's well-being. However, I got my head out of my butt and I worked on myself so I could get to a new and improved version, a version of myself that could play by the court's rules to show the truth and the patterns of behavior in an indisputable manner. So far in Season 2, we've covered how to understand and break the trauma bond in episodes 15 and 16. Here we're going to be covering PTSD, CPTSD, and my thoughts about EMDR. In Season 2, I'll also be talking about forgiveness, codependency, fellowship and mentorship, gratitude, and surrender and grief. So make sure to follow the show if you want to catch all the episodes as they drop. As they are in the season, it's really a collection of all the items that I worked through in my journey to get to a point where I could really go to battle. Because that's what it is. And also make sure to work with a professional, a trained therapist if anything I say here resonates with you. EMDR is a type of trauma therapy. It stands for eye movement desensitization and reprocessing. What I've learned about it through my own independent research is that it's been used initially on war vets and various cases of people with PTSD, and that nobody's really able to explain how it works in the brain. All they know is that it works. What it looks like is it's a sensory stimulation where they'll either make your eyes look left, right, left, right, left, right, or use another sense to stimulate left, right, left, right. And what it does is it moves a memory from the traumatic memory folder over to the bad memory folder. The difference between the two is that a bad memory is something you can talk about without any dysregulation. A traumatic memory is something that either you can't talk about, or if you do talk about it, you will trigger one of the 4 trauma responses. You'll either go into fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. The way I look at it, because I've got a very vivid imagination, is that I've got Shrek, the green ogre, jumping into the driver's seat whenever I'm trying to deal with a traumatic memory. So I'll be going about my day and something's going to trigger the trauma, and Shrek will get into the driver's seat and start reacting for me. So I'll either be unable to finish my sentence, or my voice will get louder, I'll get agitated, or I'll start being super nice and super funny, You know how trauma survivors are the most hilarious people. That's a fawning response that can be triggered by a traumatic memory. And so you want all of that to move into the bad memory folder so you can talk about it. Basically, you don't want to be Shrek. Don't be Shrek. Don't be triggered so easily that you fall into one of those 4 trauma responses. You want to get to a point where you can talk about things. In my case, when I tried to handle the traumatic memories via whatever it's called, the type of therapy where you talk with the therapist about what happened and what was done to you, and you try to work through that through talking, all it's done for me was re-traumatize me. So I'm not a doctor, I'm not a scientist, I'm none of that, and I invite you to take everything I say as a story of lived experience. But I'm not the only person who has felt that talk therapy has only re-traumatized me. What it's done when I was trying to talk about what was done to me was that I could feel Shrek get into the driver's seat, and I would start to either freeze and not be able to get the words out, or I would get agitated, or I would just up and leave, or I would start cracking jokes, which is completely inappropriate. It's a fawning response. Another problem with talk therapy versus EMDR is that if you're a survivor of narcissistic abuse, you're very likely also a survivor of financial abuse. And so you're just not going to have the budget for the many sessions that it takes to do the talking therapy. That's a type of therapy that's been incredibly helpful for me in my journey in other circumstances and to achieve other goals. So to look into how my childhood has influenced who I've become, or to look into why certain experiences have maybe influenced my relationship with men. Very useful for those areas of exploration, but not for trauma. Okay? All you're doing in talk therapy is you're making Shrek stronger, because every time you try to talk about it, he jumps in, does his thing, takes over, and messes up the entire session for you. And it's a workout for him. He gets stronger. You don't want to be doing that. EMDR is a short-term, very impactful type of therapy. In my case, it took anywhere between 2 and 8 sessions per traumatic memory that I wanted to clean out of my nervous system. So 2 sessions was for something that had happened maybe a month before inside a store in my neighborhood. Someone almost punched me, and I did have the trauma symptoms after that happened. So I was avoiding that store. I would never go back there. I wouldn't come out of my apartment at nighttime. When I did go out, I'd be carrying pepper spray. I would keep ruminating over what had happened. I would get really jumpy. So I had all the symptoms, and it was very easy to get rid of because it was so recent, and that one only took 2 sessions. But for traumatic memories that date back to childhood, that have grown deep roots into my nervous system and have pretty much shaped who I've become, those much older traumatic memories took 8 sessions to clean out of my nervous system. At this point, I'd like to ask you to please leave this show a 5-star review so that more women like you and me can have access to this content. I absolutely believe in EMDR, and I want more people to hear about it. I can create the content over here, and you over there need to please push this content upwards in the algorithm. Thank you so much. If I were to talk to past me from a few years ago, and that would be the woman that I'm talking to right now, because the goal of this podcast is to give you the shortcuts. If you're in the thick of PTSD, narcissistic abuse recovery, parenting with ASD, parenting an ASD child, the person I'm talking to, that would be me a few years ago when none of these resources were available. So if I were to talk to past me, hint, hint, I'm talking to you, I would get that woman to go to EMDR the minute I left their relationship. That relationship that felt so intimidating, so manipulative, so violent, and that left me with PTSD. And instead, I went on to live with PTSD for a few years with a newborn, and that was not the optimal combination. My kid would have needed me to not be so jumpy, not be so startled, not ruminate so much over what was done to me, feeling so distant and detached from most situations, all the while being on guard all the time. That was not ideal for the development of the nervous system of a newborn while I was dealing with all of that. And what I'll be talking about in the next episode is how helpful it's been to go through EMDR to perform much better in court, to navigate a high conflict co-parenting relationship much better, to advocate for my child in school, etc. I will tell the world what EMDR has done for me until the day I die. If you're a single parent, you cannot be spending all that energy in all your trauma symptoms when you're sleep deprived. If you're autistic, everything's exhausting to begin with. You need to allocate all of that energy into the day-to-day, not into your trauma symptoms. Quick heads up about my experience with EMDR. Because trauma lives in the body, it lives in the nervous system, it doesn't live up in the ether in your thoughts. It's very much a physical experience. And so when you release that, you might have somatic experiences. In my case, I had a very strong tummy ache, something that had never happened to me before. I was suddenly struck with this huge pain. It was so bad that I fell to the floor, and I texted my neighbor because I had an emergency plan in place with her, and I told her, okay, baby's safe. I fed him at that time. Diaper was changed at that time. I'm about to pass out. If you don't hear from me in the next half hour, please come in and take over. That's how bad the pain was, because there was this release in my body from doing the EMDR. And also you'll feel completely spent after an EMDR session. So it's not something you want to schedule the morning of a job interview, the morning of a court hearing, the morning of an appointment with the school principal where you have to advocate for a child. You probably want to schedule those appointments strategically, knowing that you'll pretty much be useless for the rest of the day after your session. Please remember to follow the show on the platform you're listening from. And in the next episode, we talk about the numerous things that EMDR has changed in my life, how it has completely changed my performance in family court, why it's crucial to handle your trauma, to be better equipped to parent with ASD, and to co-parent when you're observing narcissistic patterns of behavior. Until that next episode, your only job is to take it one day at a time. You make it until this evening, and then you do that again tomorrow. We will see you next week.